Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Afopel Gromi, and I am a second-year law student here at Homerton College, and I'm also one of the BME officers on the JCR. I am delighted to introduce your guest, the Principal of Homerton, Lord Willie, and to welcome the Reverend Al Sharpton. Following the pioneers Sanita Allen at Jesus College, Cambridge, and Valerie Amos at University College, Oxford, Simon Willie became the first black man to head a college at Cambridge or Oxford, when he was elected by the Fellows of Homerton College in 2021. His career has been as an activist and campaigner. Realizing that elections could be won or lost by the votes of the black population of the UK, he set up Operation Black Vote in 1996 to encourage black and ethnic minorities to register to vote, to stand for office, and to exercise their power. In 1996, there were 4 ethnic minority members of the UK Parliament. Operation Black Vote helped move the tally to 66 at the last general election, and has supported minorities to stand as local councillors, mayors, and magistrates. He cites key figures in the US civil rights movement, Reverend Jesse Jackson and Reverend Al Sharpton amongst them, as inspirations because voter registration was such a key part of their program too. And like them, he sees himself as a follower of Dr. Martin Luther King. Arriving at Homerton in October 2021, he put in shifts with the gardeners and porters and kitchen staff. And in November, he brought the King to see us. Simon was a trusted advisor to the Prince of Wales, now King Charles, on race and community cohesion. In 2016, 39 black students were admitted to Cambridge. Just a few years later, it was near 150. Cambridge is changing, and Simon Willie both reflects that change and leads it. It is my pleasure to ask Lord Willie to introduce our guest.
Thank you. Thank you, Afopi. That was a wonderful introduction and a great speech. You know, you have 2 political activists. Can you hear me in the back? Thank you. You have 2 political activists who have been, myself for 30 years, this gentleman to my left, 50 years plus. And part of that journey is to look out for the next generation of political talent, right? So we love your speech, and I hope that you'll be empowered by what you just did, and you carry on that journey. Because as you said that Cambridge is changing, and changing big. This great hall, which is 250 years old. Who would have thought today that we have a session like this with one of the greatest civil rights icons that's ever spoken, and Cambridge's first black male head. But it's here that it occurs, and it's Homerton College. That's what we do. That's who we are. You know, I met this brother 30 years ago. He'll tell the story how we met. But we resigned ourselves to change the world, to make a difference. And this brother has been a mentor, a friend, and somebody in the struggle where together we do great things. I picked him up yesterday at the airport at 8 o'clock. He'd had a flight from New York. As soon as he landed, we didn't stop. One meeting after the other, interviews, speeches, conversations. I dropped him at his hotel about 5 o'clock. I thought he might have a rest. I said to Johnny Mack, who was with him, "How's the Reverend doing?" You know what he said? "He's in the gym." Then we showed his film, Loud Mouth. He'd tell you why. He'd tell you why it's called Loud Mouth. Loud mouth to be heard. Loud mouth to be heard, to make a difference, to fight for those that are at the forefront of feeling injustice. I'm proud that I've been with him on this journey. But as he said to me today, he said, Simon, I can't believe it. I can't believe that from 30 years ago, you're now a Lord of the Realm and principal of Homerton College, Cambridge University. But you know, Brother Simon, your work is still badly needed. No time to rest. No time to bask in the 30 years. It's time to continue to achieve. And let me say this, brother Al, is that I'm in a great place to do it. I'm in a wonderful place at Homerton College and Cambridge University. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for choosing me. But we got work to do. We got people to inspire. We've got pathways to make. So people will look at Homerton College and Cambridge University, talented kids from every street, from every corner of the country and the globe. You know what they'll say? When I grow up, I want to go to Homerton College to be brilliant, to develop, to do great things in the world. So it gives me enormous pleasure to introduce this man who for so many years has fought the good fight and will continue to do so. Can you please be upstanding? Please be upstanding and welcome the civil rights icon, Reverend Al Sharpton.
Well, first of all, let me thank you all for being here this afternoon. And let me go to my version of my relationship with Sir Woolley. 31 years ago, a young man named Roland Adams was killed in a racial incident in London. And at the same time, I was leading marches and protests in the United States around racial killings. And I was called by two young activists to come to the UK and try to bring some kind of international attention to the killing of Roland Adams. And I flew over. It was interesting because on the flight, a man came and sat next to me and started asking me questions. He said he was a reporter. And he wanted to know what my intention of protest was going to be once I landed. And I told him, we're going to protest. We want to see those that were guilty to be prosecuted and justice for the family. He says, and are you afraid of violence? I said, we never have violence. I came out of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. School of Thought. I believe in nonviolent protest. And he kept going back to violence, and I kept refuting it. When we finally landed at Heathrow, those that were with me and I got online to go through customs, and I noticed he went on another line. And when we got outside, we realized that he was not a reporter, he was from Scotland Yard. And had I answered the questions differently, I would have been banned from England. I say that because it was after this discovery at Heathrow, I find myself in the front line with these two young activists that had invited me. And as we began marching, there was groups of young whites all along the way waving bananas at us, calling us monkeys. This is in England. One of those two young activists was Simon Woolley. And to see Simon Woolley go on to be knighted a lord and now the president of this college in Cambridge shows you both the victories and the challenges of race in this present world. We have made great strides, and we still have great challenges. And if there's anything I say in these few moments today, is to challenge you to face the challenges of your day and to move the progress and forward movement of how we deal with the question of race and class and sex in your generation as those ahead of you have done. Because even with the achievements, it is a great thing that we see at Homerton that you have a black president. It's a great thing to see that we have more people now in Parliament and in the House of Lords of color than ever in British history. But we still have inherent inequality. In the United States, we've now gone from where we couldn't vote and where when we were able to vote, we had no voter protection, to where we have elected and re-elected a black president, and today a black woman as vice president. But we still can't guarantee a young black man not to be beat to death unarmed by police. So the question is, do we become so intoxicated with our personal achievements that they do not serve the broader good? Because what difference does it make to get blacks or browns or gays or women in higher places if we can't protect the places we come from? So I was born and raised in a black area. My father left when I was young. My mother raised me as a single mother on welfare, did domestic work. And I've been able in my life to now host a TV show and radio show and talk to the President of the United States and known in various parts of the world. But it doesn't matter if the community I come from is no different than when I was there. Because individual success without some collective enhancement really means nothing to anyone in the long run. I grew up idolizing and looking up to Martin Luther King, and I kind of followed my ministry. I started preaching as a young boy, and I never wanted a big church. I never wanted that kind of ministry. I felt called to social justice ministry. And as I look back over my life, if you were to ask me who the minister was with the biggest congregation in Brooklyn, New York, when I was growing up, no one knows his name. If I were to call it, you would not know who I was talking about. Who had the biggest car, who had the biggest mansion, no one would care. But everyone remembers Dr. King, and everyone remembers those like him, because what you do with where you go in life is more important than you going there. I can tell you, as one that has done, he referred to, I did a eulogy just last week, and I'll get into that in a minute. I did a eulogy last week for someone killed by police. That's a very well-known case now in the United States and other parts of the world. But I've also done eulogies for people that were famous that were not victims. I did the eulogy for pop star Michael Jackson's funeral, and for James Brown, the godfather of soul music, who was like a father to me. And I spoke at Aretha Franklin's funeral and Rosa Parks' funeral. The most difficult funerals that I've ever had to speak at is the funerals of people that never did anything in life. Family calls you, says, "Reverend, I'd like you to preach the funeral of my cousin." And I say, "Well, okay, tell me what they were about." And they really can't tell me. So the most difficult job is to preach the funeral of somebody that you have to make up the sermon, because the person that dies, life is nothing you could talk about. Now, you're young, younger than me, even younger than Simon. But you should think about, what is your life meaning? Yes, you got to Cambridge. Yes, you're on a trajectory that great things are expected. But what will it mean? Will you just be another accomplished person that accomplished something but did nothing with the accomplishments? Which brings us to the question of race. Ever since mankind has been recorded, there's always been the battle of the different against the different, white against black. Go back to biblical times, the Egyptians against the Israelites. Whatever it is, people always want to have power over the different. I come out of a race that was put in slavery in the United States, stripped of its name. We didn't even know our names. Families broke up. Totally had no rights anyone had to respect. Couldn't even name our children after us. I remember in 2007, a reporter came to me from the New York Daily News and said, for Black History Month, we're doing the family trees of well-known national figures. We'd like to do your family tree. I said, all right. He came to me in about early January of that year, 2007. He called me about a week later. He said, can I come see you again? I said, okay. He came with another reporter with him and a photographer. And I said, this seems a lot for a little column on Black History Month next month. He said, let me ask you a question. Do you know your great-grandfather's name on your father's side? I said, no, I never knew. He said, you knew your grandfather? I said, yes. What was his name? I said, Coleman Sharpton. He said, Coleman Sharpton was Coleman Sharpton Jr. Your great-grandfather was Coleman Sharpton Sr. And he was a slave in a town called Ellenville, South Carolina. I said, no, my father's family was from Florida. He said, no, let me tell you how they got to Florida. He said that the owner of your great-grandfather, Alexander Sharpton, died, and his wife, Anna Thurman Sharpton, who happened to be the great aunt of the Southern segregationist Senator Strom Thurman, who I'd marched on many times. I didn't know I was marching on my former slave owners. I would probably march longer and stronger if I knew that. He said Anna took her slaves and she would piece them out to go to other states to work so she could pay her bills. I said, and he lived in this, he said, Ellenville, South Carolina. I flew down there. Porter went with me. And I went in that town to the white side of town and to the First Baptist Church. And in the cemetery in the South in the United States, in the Deep South, a lot of the churches have cemeteries of their members extended from the church. And a third of the cemeteries were Sharptons and Thurmans. And that was the family that owned my great-grandfather. And it occurred to me something I never thought about. And that is that Sharpton was not our name. That was the owner's name of my great-grandfather. I don't know my name. And every black in America, when we sign our names, we're signing the ownership that we were subjected to. Now, you have the option of being bitter about that. You have the option of being angry about that. You have the option of getting revenge for that. Or you have the option of taking the country and the world another way so those things are not repeated and you don't duplicate and reflect that within yourself. Those that move society forward are the ones that take what was wrong and correct it. And in order to correct it, you have to correct it within yourself. So when I started in social justice ministry, the difference of those that went the King path was we had to not deal with revenge, but deal with redemption. Not only redeeming people that were wrong, but a society that was wrong. When I was a young teenager, my pastor, my second pastor in life, Dr. William Augustus Jones, made me read a book by Nebo, Moral Man, Immoral Society. The structures in society must be made moral. Otherwise, they become based on power. And the pursuit of power for power's sake takes away the humanity of people, and it's only a matter of time before someone seeking more power can topple you. We in the US and the UK still have not totally come to reconcile the differences in race. So in the United States, last week, a young black man, 39 years old, father of 4, is driving home, stopped by 5 policemen that snatched him out the car and beat him to death, literally beat him to death. They had on body cameras, and as they are beating him, they are saying in the camera something opposite than the video shows. They're saying, well, put your hands behind you so we can arrest you, while they were holding up his arms. So they were schooled in a narrative of get your alibi on camera while you are brutalizing this guy. What they forgot is there were air cameras in the city, so we could see when the video was released that what they were saying was not what's going on. And of course, there was great outrage. And the family and the attorney, Ben Crump, who handles a lot of these cases, had me come in to do the eulogy and work with those protesting. The thing that bothered me most about this case, and some of you have probably heard about it in the last week, the case of Nichols, is that the 5 police that beat him to death were black. And the media wanted to know if I would come and fight black cops like I fought the white cops that 3 years ago put the knee on the neck and killed George Floyd. And the issue for me was it's not about black and white, it's about right and wrong. And race is still involved because I don't believe those black cops would have risked beating a white kid to death in Memphis because they knew the difference in accountability there. But the moral thing is that no matter who the culprit, you must fight because it's wrong. Well, the same is in England. I come to England yesterday. I study what's going on here. I've had a relationship for decades here. In America, we have stop and frisk, where a disproportionate amount of young blacks and browns are stopped and frisked by cops than whites. So in cities where blacks are not even the majority, they're stopped and frisked more. And we protested and marched and was able to get city councils to make that against the law because it was a straight racial question. Well, in England, you have stop and search, which is the British version of stop and frisk. And if you study stop and search, you will find that the same racial disparities are there. England cannot explain to me why in COVID-19, when England was in lockdown, more people by 24% black were interrogated and stopped by police than whites. I'm talking about in 2020, 2021, all the way till now. I'm not talking about in the 1800s. So the challenge is there. People say, yes, Reverend Al, but we're doing better. Yes, you are. But better does not mean we have made this whole. Malcolm X used to say something that I find interesting. He said that if you were to take a knife and stab me in the back, 6 inches in my back, and then pull it out 3 inches, that's better. But I still have 3 inches of knife in my back. So those that hold the knife can congratulate themselves for doing better. But those who has the knife in their back say, but you're still holding a knife in my back. Better is not good enough. We are more educated now, we have more technology now, we have more ability now, and we still discriminate based on race, based on gender, based on sexuality, and we still find ways of trying to justify it. So just putting faces in high places is not enough. It is whether or not the places change. So you can have diversity, but if you don't change the makeup of what is being diversified, you're only diversifying the same structural inequality that was there. I'm not looking for better or darker slave masters. I'm looking for freedom. It doesn't make me feel better to getting beaten by a black cop than a white cop. I'm trying to stop the beatings. And I think that what we have done in the Western world is try and color the same unequal systems, unequal structures. And we have our moral leaders become the justifiers of the setup rather than the advocates for the change. So my challenge to you is, are we going to be continuations or those that continue the fight to deal with our structural inequality, structural evils, or are we going to just go for a self-aggrandizing life where we rise to the best and the top of our field, but the field doesn't change at all? You just want to be successful, whatever that means. But you're successful in an area and a field that has not really redeemed society. It's just part of the same structural insensitivity and inequality. And that is why I began by saying that at the end of your life, no one will care what your title was. No one will care how many degrees you had. No one will care how many cars you had and what mansion you had. People will only care what you did that meant for more than yourself. And people will only remember those that have served more than themselves. Service, and service that impacts and affects people more than you, is the real reason to be alive. When I was walking with Lord Woolley, I always pause because I've got to stop calling him Simon in front of everybody else. I'm still adjusting to his new rank. But when I was walking with Sir Woolley just a few moments ago, and he was talking about how both of us grew up in various housing projects. They call it different in England than the projects in the United States, but it's the same thing as public housing. And where we've both gone, I'm now vice presidents and do what I do, and he where he is. And I say, yes, but it really is sad because most of our contemporaries where we came from didn't break through to become nothing. Most of the guys I grew up with are either dead or in jail. That I can't do anything about. But I can do something about where we grew up at. And I can do something about making it fairer and easier for those that comes through those same communities. And I can conduct myself in a way that can say to them, as Dr. King said to me, that you can break through and do something, but also do something with it. I meet too many people as I travel the world with big titles, with no functions. I am so-and-so, but what do you do with that? Well, I'm so-and-so, but what does that mean? Well, you don't look at my background. Great resume, but it means nothing unless your title has a function that serves more than your ego and more than your own self-aggrandizement. I'd rather have no title and have helped change society and make it fairer and make it equal than to have a title sitting on a throne that nobody cares about but me. Mark Twain had a saying that I think capsulizes what I'm trying to say to you this afternoon. He said the two most important moments in your life is the moment that you're born and the moment you find out why you were born. And I don't know what your particular studies are here at Homerton, but I would challenge you to figure out at some point. For me, I was very young. For you, it may be at whatever point, but find out why you were born. You were born with certain gifts and talent that you just inherited at birth, God-given talent. What are you going to do with that talent that gives your life a meaning? Most people go through life never figuring out what they're doing here. They born, they grow up, they deal with life, they go through the traps of life, make a living, get things, material possessions, and drop dead. And some preacher like me rolls out and try to act like we all ought to be crying. But a few of us figure out why we were born, why we had gifts, what we were going to do with those gifts, and try to make them count. Unlike Dr. King and unlike others that I grew up under, Reverend Jesse Jackson, who also has come to this campus, I was not born in the South. I was born in New York. And in New York, unlike the South, it was a city that never slept. Broadway lights, Broadway shows, Empire State Building, Statue of Liberty, Radio City, all kinds of attractions, tourists from all over the world. So when people were killed because of their race or couldn't get promotions in corporations because of their race or couldn't live in certain areas because of their race, we could not get the attention of the city because there were all these distractions and attractions. So I had to be loud. I had to be dramatic. I had to do things to make people notice what we were doing. That's why when John Legend and Cardell Massenburg, a music mogul, came to me and wanted to do this film and said we want to name it Loudmouth, I said that is the strategy I used. If I was in the Deep South in one little town, I could do a good sermon and pass out flyers and get everybody's attention. But I had to be loud in New York because I'm competing with everything else. But once I got everyone's attention, I had to have something to say. And I had to be able to deal with policy. So once we fought, when I started, we didn't dream we'd have a black president. Once we got Obama in, and Obama would invite me into the White House to advise what do we do about various issues, Trayvon Martin and other issues, I had to be able to deal with social policy, and I had to conduct our movements in a way that would challenge him and not undermine him. Otherwise, we were loud for what? Toward what end? Joe Biden right now, we talk. We spoke last week about the death of the Nichols case, and I'm dealing with policing policy. The issue to me is not all of the other stuff. The issue is what we get done. Port asked me here yesterday, Joe Biden is 80 years old. Do you think that somebody that old ought to be running for re-election? I'd rather have an old man with a good vision than a young man with no vision at all. So, do I want an 82-year-old president that tries to bring races together and that tries to deal with the economic empowerment of those that are poor, that deserve an equal chance? Or do I want a 30-year-old that's going to keep entrenched inequality? We argue about things that don't matter, and we must find our way to make them matter. So the challenge that I leave with you is don't admire those that have made a great contribution. Find out the great contribution you'll make. Don't be one that just sits there and says, wow, I've seen great people. You can be great. And the way to be great is to do great things. You may never be famous, but anybody can be great if you find a way to do great service. So the challenge is not to find out how I did what I did or Wooly did what he did. Find out what you're doing here and do that, and do it in the context of the continued need to bring the world closer together. Nations are fighting nations. Races are fighting races. We are dealing with the gender inequality. We're dealing with those that are homophobic. All of that needs people that are gifted and talented and self-assured to say that I'm going to do my part to bring these divisions down and have an even playing field. Otherwise, we end up with another generation of self-aggrandizing, irrelevant people that have all of the impressive resumes and did nothing with it, that had all of the great backgrounds and all of the abilities that meant nothing to nobody but them. At the end of the day, you are in the hallowed halls of Cambridge. You will not be judged by coming in these hallowed halls, because there are hundreds and thousands that came before you and thousands that'll be after you. You will be judged by when you leave these hallowed halls, which you go out into a broader divided society and help do to make it better. That is what your challenge is. Your challenge is not to be one of the many that's credentialed and elevated. Your challenge is to elevate those that no one would help elevate and bring down those that have gotten too big for an equal and fair society. And if you got to be loud, be loud. If you have to be soft, be soft. If you have to be controversial, be controversial. But know deep down inside that you found out that part of why you're here is to make a difference. And the difference start with being different yourself. And that is not just going along to get along, but defining and refining who you are and why you are. And then one day, somebody may take you out to projects and tell your story, because it's a story to tell, because it's a story of hope and a story of healing. And who knows, you may even be made a Lord one day. Thank you.
I've known him for 30 years, and I never tire of listening to him. It nearly brought tears to my eyes too, Fernanda. It's, you know, I've seen him preach and raise the roof. I've seen him story tell like he did today. but each time it's moving. We were very lucky to watch the private screening of Loudmouth, and there was a wonderful piece in the film. They're asking, why are you a loudmouth? Reverend Sharpton, why are you a loudmouth? And he turned around and he said, nobody asked Reverend Sharpton to keep a secret. They call him to make a noise, to put a spotlight on a situation. And many of those people that you defend don't make the media, but you try your damnedest to do so, and you take it to another level in which many more people have to acknowledge those inequalities. I'm sure there are many questions, but one question that I want to put to you. Here we are, Homerton College, Cambridge University, one of the best academic institutions in the world. You, sir, will be reminded of Martin Luther King's paper, I think it was 1968, when he posed a question to America, and I guess to the UK too. What is the purpose? What is the purpose of education? When he put that question to the world, what do you think he was thinking?
I think that he was defining the purpose of education to give education to the whole person, male and female. And he said that you need to have the academic skills, but also the character. Because to have academic skills without character, it will not serve anyone. It's like, Dr. King, that was his definition. I put it this way: to have education without character is like putting on cologne without bathing. It just makes you stink worse. I think that you must have a character that balances your education, so you don't become self-important and self-impressed, but it's balanced with that your character means that I'm educated to go and do something that learned people do, not just sit back and admire myself because I'm educated. And in fact, you're really not well educated if you don't have good character.
Wow, that's powerful. Questions from the floor, please. If you raise your hand, say who you are. I'm not sure if we've got a microphone, roaming mic. Okay, so we've got a young lady here, please, at the front. Please stand up.
Hi, Reverend Al Sharpton. My name is Kia Eli. I'm a PhD student at Cambridge from the US. And my question is, over the last 40 years, do you think the role of the church in civil rights movements has changed or remained the same, and why?
I think that the role of the church has changed somewhat, and then in other ways not changed. The black church in America was the first institution blacks owned coming out of slavery. I don't think a lot of people understand that once blacks were freed from chattel slavery, that we never were given any resources. It's okay, you're free. You walk off the plantation. We had nothing that gathered us together but the church. So out of the church, our businesses, our politics, our fraternities, everything we know started in the church, because that was the only thing we owned. That was ours. We didn't have to get permission from anyone. So our movements came out of the church. Many of our leaders were church. Frederick Douglass was a minister. Nat Turner, who led slave rebellions, was a minister. All the way to Reverend Adam Clayton Powell, second black in Congress, Reverend Martin Luther King, Minister Malcolm X. I think as we became more integrated in society, we began having other institutions that were more secular that got involved in the movement. But I think the strongest institution still remains the black church that we own and control. So you would read data that says that there was a time 85% of blacks went to church. Now it's 62%. but there's still not 62% of blacks that do anything as much as that. The other part of that is that the black church is still independent because it is basically financed by their own parishioners. So if I get a call from the Nichols family or George Floyd's family, I don't have to ask a boss, can I go? Because I'm supported by black churches that are members of my board, and I go. And in many cases, we even pay for the funerals and all. And I think those that become big in politics, that have to deal with who are their political contributors, or those that are big in the corporate world that have to deal with their stockholders, they have restraints that I don't have. So people say, well, why is Sharpton always there? One, because they ask me. I've never fought a situation that the people involved, the families, didn't ask me. And two, because I don't have to check with anybody but the airlines on whether I can go.
Gentleman at the back.
Yeah, hello. First of all, thank you, Al Sharpton, for coming today. It's like a life-defining moment to see you in real life. I would just like to ask, you were talking about how we have to have like real diversification and deal with those systemic issues. I just wanted to ask you about, you brought it up about the secular community joining with the church, the black church, and those two working together. How important do you think it is, especially in places like Cambridge, to not represent black people particularly as a monolith, but to also represent the diversity within our own culture? And how do you think we get over some of the own prejudices that our own communities face and distract us from being fair and equal with one another? Do you have anything you'd like to say to highlight how we can overcome those issues between the brothers and sisters in our communities?
I think that is very important. And the way to get over them is to first be honest about them and confront them. I have taken a lot of flack among people in the black church because I have openly said we must embrace the fact that women should not be discriminated against, gays should not be discriminated against, and that we cannot fight oppression by oppressing others. My sister, 3 years older than me, was gay all her life. I didn't discover gay in the LGBT community. I grew up with gay. So why am I going to act like I don't know what that is? And why do I discriminate? Bayard Rustin organized the 1963 March on Washington. Martin Luther King did the historic speech, I Have a Dream. They had him take a back seat, even though he's the organizer, because the FBI had come and told them he was gay. And in those days, you couldn't be that. We've got to knock down all walls. It doesn't mean that you have to be that or no one has to have your agreement. It's about you accepting the fact that it's going to take all of us from different levels of existence that fight for everybody's freedom so you can have your own protected. So when I came out early in the 21st century saying, no, I'm not opposed to same-sex marriage, many ministers that I preach for said, that's going to be hard, Doc, for you to come preach in my church. I said, well, fine. I said, but I don't feel I have the right to decide people having the legal right to protect their partnerships if they are partners, is what they call them. He said, no, well, I believe, these are ministers talking to me, I believe that marriage is sacred. I said, yeah, it is, but it's also legal. If you don't believe marriage is legal, then the next time one of your parishioners want a divorce, tell them to go to the pastor, not to the courthouse. The most sacred lady I know in church would not let her pastor decide the alimony. She's going to go to the judge. So marriage is civil, and people have the right to their civil marriages without your permission. So I think you're right. We have to have these open, uncomfortable discussions, even in the black community, if we're going to be fighting for liberation. It can't be just for the liberation of some of us.
Please.
Hi, I give it honor to God as the head of my life, to you, Reverend, and also to you, Mr. Woolley, Lord Woolley. I'm incredibly excited to have you here. My name is Maisha Jemison. I'm a PhD student here from Virginia. The question I have is around how we navigate when we can make impact using these degrees, using our privileges within systems versus when we just need to dismantle the system altogether. I think a lot of us grapple with determining when we should swap from dismantling from the inside to destructing it from the outside.
It's very good. I think that, first of all, let me give you the assurance that we all grappled with it when we were younger. And I think the answer that I ended up landing on is what is more achievable and effective for the people that I care to try and elevate. Is it more achievable to eradicate the whole system? Or is it more achievable to correct the system and use my talents to try and do that? What do I mean by that? Fight police brutality. There are some in the movement that say we shouldn't have policing at all. There are others of us that say we should have legislation that correct police behavior. Well, I think that it is difficult to correct police behavior with legislation, but it's impossible to eradicate policing, because if you eradicate it, there's going to be some form of policing anyway. So I think the question is, do we care enough about what we're trying to achieve to do what is achievable, or do we want to be so intellectually correct in our own minds that we advocate something that we know we realistically can't achieve? Then do we really want to serve the people?
Sure. A question, second row. Lady at the second row, please. Yeah, lady. Oh, is it a gentleman? Okay.
Thank you.
Please introduce yourself.
My name is Osita Abwem. My daughter thought that her 90-year-old father should come to listen to Al Sharpton. I'm so moved. Reverend, there was Emmett Till, 1955. There was Strange Fruit, 1959. In 2004, you founded your great network. The question I have for you is, when did your road to Damascus start, your Damascene experience? Because you've had such an influence all over the world. That is my question.
My road to Damascus, I think, you know, I grew up in the Pentecostal church, and I was a boy preacher. And my mother, as I said, was a single mother, and she was very much a fundamentalist Pentecostal. And when I was around 10, 11, I used to watch the news a lot. I didn't play a lot with other kids because their kids were uncomfortable playing with me because their parents used to go hear me preach in church even at that age. So they didn't want, you know, you couldn't swear too much around me and all that. And I certainly had problems getting a date because every girl said, no, I ain't going out with him because my mother, you know, goes here and preach. So I'd watch the news a lot. And I became mesmerized by Adam Clayton Powell and some of the activists. And my mother noticed this. And she brought me to my pastor, Bishop F.D. Washington. And she said, this boy is watching all this marching and stuff. I'm afraid he's going to leave the church. And Bishop Washington said, I know what to do. He brought me to a neighbor of his, Reverend William Augustus Jones, who we were talking about earlier. And he was Dr. King's chapter leader in New York. And he said, Dr. Jones said, I know what to do with him. We'll bring him into the movement, but we're all ministers. Dr. King's organization was called the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. It's black church-based. And he won't leave the church, but he'll be involved in what he wants to in activism. He introduced me to a guy, twice my age, but he was younger and had style, a big afro, medallions, all that, dressed like Mod Squad in those days, named Jesse Jackson. And it clicked with me that I wanted to be like that. I didn't want a church. I didn't want to be going through, you know, what was the black pastor at the time. I liked what Jesse was doing. That was my road to Damascus. And I tell Jesse now that had I not met him, I'd have been T.D. Jakes. But because I met him, I became Al Sharpton. And you know, he was like the father of that. He tells me now that he's older and I'm older, quit saying that I'm your father. It's different when you was 12 and I was 26, and you now in your 60s, I'm in my 80s. So I call him my big brother, but Jesse was the style I chose in the movie. Right. That was my road to Damascus.
You know, it's funny that when I was young, I said I wanted to be like Reverend Al, and I would try the lips in front of the mirror.
Nobody called me Lord Sharpton, so you went your own way.
Alicia, Professor Alicia Jones. Go on. Yeah, no, I'm.
Oh, Calvin Taylor Skinner. I am from Tennessee, but now with my wife here in Cambridge, as she is a professor at the university. My question is, first of all, thank you, Reverend Al Sharpton, for all you have done and what you continue to do for our struggle for liberation. My question is, we often have a tussle or conversations, I should say, in Tennessee, particularly around allyship, what allyship should look like with our partners outside of the black community. What is your philosophy around allyship, and what should allyship look like in this struggle?
Allies are important to have as long as they're allied for stated, agreed goals. The problem with allies that want to change the goals, and they're not allies at all. So if we are fighting for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act in the U.S. Congress now, we want allies that can help get senators and Congress people to vote for that. We don't want allies that join and say, we don't need legislation, we want to do this. Well, then we're not allied. And I think that sometimes we end up with allies that want to divert the goal rather than achieve the goal. And I think that that is where we've got to be very careful, that in order to have allies, we give up what it is that we're after.
There's a lady at the back. Yes.
I don't know if this is it working? Okay.
Speak. Put the mic close to you and tell us who you are.
Okay. Hello. Thank you so much, Reverend Sharpton. It's such a privilege to have a Sunday on a Tuesday, so thank you for that. My name is Madame Fowusu. I'm a music undergrad student here at Cambridge, and Professor Jones is actually my supervisor, my mentor. She's been for the past 2 years, so hello. And music has always inspired me to kind of keep going. It's always been a fuel of way of activism for me. So I wanted to ask, what songs or music pieces in general inspire you that help you keep going?
Great question.
That's a great question. I obviously gospel music. I grew up as a boy preacher. Mahalia Jackson used to come to our church all the time, and her songs always inspired me, gospel music. But I had an experience, and it's funny, I was telling your teacher and Reverend Skinner, when I was 18 years old, I'd been in activism then for about 9 years. A young man joined my youth group, and his name was Teddy. I was 18, he was 18. He'd come to New York from the South to go to Columbia University. He never got there because he got killed in a car accident. And his father came to New York to do a memorial for him. And the disc jockeys told his father about this young teenage preacher, and he should do something with him in memory of his son. His father was James Brown, the godfather of soul. So I became like James Brown's son. And James Brown, the first time I came to England, James Brown brought me here. And he would always bring me out on the road and treat me like a son. He had other kids, but I think because I like to hear all the stories, you know, I guess when you're somebody's child, you like, Dad, okay. But I wanted to hear it all. I'd sit up with him till 4 in the morning, tell me more, tell me more. And the interesting thing about James Brown, is James Brown's music started church-based. So I would listen to a lot of his music. And I listened to message music, songs like Marvin Gaye's song and things like that. I work out every morning listening to music. Music is important because it takes you out of, we are now all addicted to social media. People get up, me included, and read what's on the Google feed and all of that. I listen to music first. So I go out to come back in because it keeps my spiritual connection. It's usually gospel music or message songs that kind of prepares me for the day, even before I look at what is on the news, whether through social media or regular media. You know, you set your own beat that way.
You know, I'm lucky when I travel with Reverend, I get to listen to all the stories about him and James Brown, and Michael Jackson. So I'm happy to tell you, but you've got to give me some gin and tonics. Great stories, by the way, really, really. Let me ask you before you sit down. What music inspires you?
African-American, also Ghanaian as well. My parents, they came here in the 90s. Oh, actually, I could. Thank you, someone give me the microphone back. Gospel music from America and also from Ghana as well. Excuse me, my parents are Ghanaian, and they grew up listening to Kirk Franklin, Mahalia Jackson when they were teenagers, so they brought that love in for me. So yeah, that's kind of something that really helps me.
Thank you, thank you. This lady at the back, please stand up. Don't forget to introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, Reverend Sharpton. My name is Lesedi, and I'm from South Africa. I'm studying a PhD, and I'm the first in my family. I'm sure you're very familiar with our history. I understand your sentiment about going back to your community and helping your community. I think the challenge many African students have when we do come overseas is that it's very difficult to go back and assist without resources, because we need to come overseas to get resources in order to make an impact back home. And sometimes it feels like maybe the second or third generation of our children would be able to make more of an impact back home once we've gathered our resources here, educated them, made money, for instance. And it may seem selfish initially, however, it feels like a long-term plan. How would you advise that us being the first generation of Africans continue the legacy, try and help back home whilst building up our resources in order to make an impact?
I think that what you outlined as a dilemma inherent in it is the answer. The wise thing is to put yourself in a strong enough position to help back home. I don't think it's selfish at all. I think it'd be more selfish to have the ability to use what you've been able to get away from home, build on that to build the resources so when you do go home, that you can help more than to go home and just be another person home that talk about, I gave up everything for y'all, now I'm back here. Because what does that achieve? So as long as you know, that's why my message to you is know why you're here. As long as you know why you're building the resources and what you're going to do, it is a long plan toward an end. Right. And you pursue that long plan and know what you're going to do with it. But do that because you have the ability to do it, because there are many back home that never got the chance to be a PhD student and then go forward and get the resources. And you'd be able to do what they couldn't do. And they just got to hold on for 10 years or however long it takes for you to build up what you need to do to help home. I think that to deny that, I think, is counterproductive. So one of the things on the other side, and it goes to the brother in the back's question about us dealing with our own differences, is that one of the things that we have to do is also stop beating down people that are successful in our community, and that everybody that achieves something or that is beginning to accumulate something, we make them look guilty for being successful. That's part of a slave mentality too. To say, oh yeah, you think you all that because you were in school. The idea was so you can go to school. People died for you to go to school. Or who you think you are, you in Cambridge. I think I'm somebody in Cambridge that's going to do something to help. We got to stop. Don't be guilty about not being a slave. Don't be guilty about not being uneducated. The idea of the movement was to open those doors for you. Just don't forget why you went through those doors. But don't let people that didn't go through those doors make you feel like you're doing something wrong. That's what we fought for. I have one grandchild. My daughter had a grandson 4 years ago. And people would come around National Action, they were, oh, I hope he be like you. I hope he's better than me. I don't want him to duplicate me. I want him to raise the bar past what I could do. And he shouldn't feel guilty. Oh, I'm going to do more than Grandpa did, and I got to be in his model. No, don't be my model. Make your model. So you go back to South Africa and do what the Mandela era couldn't do. That's what Mandela fought for you to do. Right. If we all duplicate each other, we're not making progress.
Thank you, thank you. We've got a few more questions left. I do want to ask one of our few black professors here in Cambridge, Professor Elisa Jones. And
Thank you.
My memory serves me correct. There are only 3, so there's a challenge there. But I think Matthew, I think that I know this college at least and Cambridge in general is acknowledging the challenge, right? Where we need to go. We're impatient for change. But that's why we welcome you, sister. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Alicia Lola Jones. I teach music history in Modelfo, and some of my other students are here. I wanted to ask a question, realizing your appointment and then having such a legend, Reverend Al Sharpton here. It occurs to me, my husband and I are both 3rd and 4th generation preachers' kids, and we understand that it takes money in order to be in positions of power, like lead a college or to head a national action network where you want to respond to people with quality. It occurs to me that here at Cambridge, there is a large wealth retention. And so a lot of the conversations that we might have with regard to race in the US often center on socioeconomics here. So how might people who desire to be allies and relevant, how might they understand how to partner with both of your efforts as we look toward your legacies as trailblazers?
You know, I think that you must have the resources to help. I alluded to earlier, many times National Action Network, not only do we have a staff that operates in every region of the country and offices and all that has to pay bills, but we have to help the families. No family plans on being a tragedy, so we'll help them. Some of them we have to help for a long time going. People that are allies ought to help with resources and ought to be members, which is meager dues, or main donors that can help finance a movement. And I think that is very important. And again, people should not apologize about saying you need resources to build a movement, because you cannot do. I have 71 people on payroll in our national office. I got to pay the payroll. One of the reasons that he talks about how I work 17 hours a day, I got to raise money and do what I do. Right. Otherwise, 71 families are depending on our ability to do that, and you shouldn't apologize about that.
100%. I think that a combination of allies, of supporters. I'm particularly pleased that when we have these events, we have former principals like Kate Pretty here in the house. Please raise your hand, Kate. Please raise your hand. Give a round of applause, supporting me. Kate, you and Jeff have given me a good foundation, and you continue to support, and I know the work is not done. And then I see two brothers, two very successful brothers, David Ziambi and Tobin. Please stand up. Please stand up. There's a businessmen, and some who are not here are women too, who we can come to and we say, we need resources, aka we need your cash, to do what we do. If we're inviting widening participation, then we have to have wraparound support. We have to go upstream to nurture the talent. You know, part of our raison d'etre here, thank you guys, I'll come for you afterwards. Part of our raison d'etre here is not only to tell that Homerton is the place to come, but we have to give them the code to come here too. Understand the code, the trajectory, what you need to know. And we can't do that without working 17, 18 hours a day.
Yeah.
Right? He goes in the gym, I go for my swim.
Let me say this, though, in answering more to her question, that when George Floyd was killed, it was in the height of the pandemic in New York. Everything was locked down. I got a call from Ben Crump that is killing, police, knee on the neck, Minneapolis, and the family wants you to go to Minneapolis and help with the protest because they were rioting. I said, the problem, Ben, is we're in a pandemic. Most flights are canceled. I called Robert Smith, a black billionaire, and said, can I use your plane to go to Minneapolis? I'm going there about George Floyd. He said, yeah, I saw it on the news. The only way I got to Minneapolis was on this black billionaire's private plane. Flew me there and back, flew me back to do the funeral. I called Tyler Perry to get his plane to bring the family in from Houston. There was nobody in Floyd's family that lived in Houston. That lived in Minneapolis. They all were from Houston. So yeah, resources are important.
Right.
And it going to her point, if a Tyler Perry or Robert Smith didn't have a plane, I'd have been at the airport singing Near My God Today, but I wouldn't have got to Minneapolis. And I think that is why allies work. Everybody doesn't do the same thing in a movement. If you're a businessman and going to use your resources like she's going to with South Africa, Robert Smith needs to make billions and help the movement. Doesn't help us for him not to be a billionaire. I remember we were doing a demonstration once, and Chris, who travels with me, co-stars in my documentary. He laughs when I tell this. We were doing a demonstration once, and I said, we're all going to jail today. And I made this rousing speech right before we were going to sit in, and they came and arrested us after we sat in. And we're in what they call the bullpen behind the judge's chambers. And I look across the bullpen, and I saw our lawyer there. I said, what are you doing in here? He said, man, I got so caught up in your speech. He said, I just sat out with everybody else. I said, well, now who gonna get us out of here? So everybody got to play their position if we're gonna make this work.
I have a question for you. Anybody in the house? Any billionaires with private plane in the house? Ravi? All right, last question. Let me say, okay, last two questions with your hands up. Yes, and then the one in front, please. Make them quick-ish.
Will do. Thank you, Reverend Sharpton. I just wanted to ask, as a person that's grappled with their faith, how have you remained strong in your faith in God in a religion that tampers and is so historically based in colonialism and stuff like that? How have you...
Hold that thought. Pass the mic to the young woman in front who raised her hand. Yes? 2 in 1.
Hi, Reverend Sharpton. Thank you so much for speaking to us.
Mic closer to the mouth.
Thank you so much for speaking to us. My question was, you speak on the George Floyd legislation that you're fighting for over in the US, and there are a lot of legislations that are there to try and tackle the racialized issues that we have. But one of the issues is that once those legislations are in place, it's the enforcers who continue said racial issues. So what do you think the next steps are to ensure that real change is continued after legislation is passed?
Two questions.
Okay, first let me answer hers, then I'll go to her. The first is you need to have the legislation, and then you must enforce the legislation and put people in position to enforcement. Growing up, studying the movements before me, they had to first get a Civil Rights Act, and then a Voting Rights Act, and then have something to enforce. It won't be a magic wand when we get the legislation passed. But without it, you don't even have the ability to enforce something that is not there. So I do not think that the legislation in and of itself is a panacea. I think that it is a foundation to fight for the enforcement of it, and I think that that's the first step. Without that, though, we're just going from case to case. We're episodical. I think that in terms of faith, all of us wrestle with our faith. I don't care what stage we get to. Right. And I think part of the wrestling with our faith helps to make us even stronger in our faith. Because I find myself, every time there's another tragedy, wondering why is God letting this happen? And I tell this, it's going to sound strange, but it's true. I remember when I saw the video of George Floyd and watched that cop with no mercy with his knee on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. And I really found myself wrestling with it. And I said to myself in private, I have prayer meditation every morning before I go work out. God, why does this keep happening? And it came back to me in my own spirit, God saying I was going to ask you the same thing. I've given you the platform. I've given you the ability. Why don't y'all use it? Why do y'all keep letting it happen? My faith is built on whatever we are going through and struggling through and the contradictions. Maybe that's why there's a Bible. People went through worse than that, and they had to be strong in their faith. So, yes, I'm fighting for a George Floyd bill. Yes, I'm challenging England on stop and search. But nobody handed me a stick and told me to open the Red Sea, so I got an easier task than guys before me. And I think that's what makes my faith stronger.
Well, you know, we spent an hour and a half and it just flew by. And that's what happens when you're in conversation with this man. And I'm lucky because I get lots of conversations. But I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you will empower me to ask him back, to give other talks too. Say that again? All right, okay. Bit of lobbying going on there. Another political activist.
I didn't hear what he said.
Neither do I.
Do something for the ACS, Al Sharpton, the Cambridge ACS. I'm the events officer, Mohammed Hassan. I asked a question earlier,
okay,
sorry.
Okay. Still a bit of lobbying. All right, look.
ACS.
It's the African Caribbean Society.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So, thank you. Thank you all. I know you're all busy, but you took time out. I think you took time out in part because you support me, but in a larger part because you wanted to listen to Reverend Al Sharpton. Could we give him a round of applause and a thank you? Thank you. I am sorry that we can't stick around. Sharpton's schedule is breathtaking, and we've got to get back to London for I think about 3 events, and then he's on the plane back to the USA for another round of schedules. But thank you, Reverend.